Yeah. So welcome everyone to the second day of our SQL Open course. So in today's course, we're going to be going over some basic queries in SQL and also helping those who are new to SQL to set up your own SQL environment. Okay. So for those of you who missed the first day, we did a few introductions. Okay. And again, today we're going to start getting hands-on with the material. For any of you who are new to SQL, especially with your own working environment, you do need to download and install a few items. Okay, so the first items that you need to install would be a MySQL server. Okay, so the way that MySQL server works, it is a kind of like a virtual server that will exist on your computer. Okay. In the real work environment, the server will be set up by your company. Okay. And on the server, we'll have all your company's database along with different tables and different data for you to access. For your own practice, you will be using MySQL Server to set up this kind of virtual environment where all the databases that we're going to create will be stored. Okay. And then from the database itself, you will be running queries and then practicing your SQL skills. Okay. So that is the first thing you need to set up. Make sure you follow the download instructions. Okay. And one thing about the MySQL server setup, you will be asked to create a username and also a password. Okay, so it's very important for you to remember what the username and password is. Okay. Since this is only going to be working on your own computer, no one outside should be able to access it. Okay. You can simply leave the username as root, so ROOT, and just give the password, let's say 1234. Right, so keep it simple so that it's easy for you to remember because it is something that you will be using later on. Okay. Now, besides the MySQL server, okay, there is also the SQL Workbench for you to download and install. Okay. So the SQL Workbench is more of the working environment for your code. Okay. Once you have downloaded and installed your SQL Workbench, it will look something like this. Okay, so here is where you can set up your connections, right? So you can set up multiple connections to your SQL server. Okay, also in the future, if you're working for various companies, you can also connect to their SQL servers using MySQL Workbench as well. Okay. So those are the two basic setups for any of you who are new to SQL. Okay. Due to time restraint, I will not be going over the setup step by step. It is pretty straightforward. So if you do have any questions, feel free to watch our previous videos on the installation itself. Okay. Now, after you have set up the MySQL server and the Workbench, to make the connection, okay, you can simply click on the plus sign besides MySQL connection. And you'll see this pop-up dialog box. Okay. In this box, you can give your connection a name so that it's easy for you to identify what connection it is. Okay. Usually, you don't have to worry about the host name and the port since it is for your own private MySQL server. Again, for your actual work, your work will provide you with the host name, and also the port should be standard 3306. Here, it will ask you for the username and the password that you created when you set up MySQL server. right? So this is also why you need to remember what it is, right? So usually it is root, and then you would just type in your password to set it up for you. So any questions at this time from the audience? Okay. In that case, today I'm going to go through some simple queries that you can run in MySQL Server. Can you use, sorry, just a question in the chat. Can we use something like PostgreSQL? So that's a very good question. For our demonstrations in our course, we are using MySQL. You could also connect to PostgreSQL servers and also various other SQLs. So like Oracle SQL or DynamoDB. Okay? Between the different versions of SQL, there are slight syntax changes. Okay? Most of the queries that you run will be pretty much the same. Okay? Only some of them have slightly different like contexts, right? So maybe you need to capitalize your keywords, right? Maybe you need to indent your query to make it run better, right? But overall, right, if you learn one SQL language, so if you learn MySQL or PostgreSQL, it's very easy for you to translate over to the other SQL languages as well. Okay. Any other questions before we move on? Okay. Okay. So again, due to time restraint, I already set up the database that we're going to use today. For the again, for the instruction on setting up the database, feel free to look at our previous videos in our course. But just so you have the data on hand, for those of you who are used to setting up your databases, I will share you the link to our source. Okay. So this way, you can download the Google Drive file. Okay, yes, of course. So you can download the Google Drive file as well. And again, we'll share the link into the YouTube comments as well. Okay. So for the brief setup of the new connection, definitely I can go over it again. So once you open MySQL Workbench, you will see a screen like this. Okay. Usually you will see MySQL connections, but you will just be blank, right? So you have no new connections. If you don't see it here, you can always go to, I believe there is a connections. Usually I just go here, right, with a plus sign. Okay, and you will have this pop-up dialog box. Okay, and all you have to do for a basic setup to your own MySQL server is just to type in a connection name. Okay, the host name should be default to your own IP address, so you don't have to worry too much about that. Okay, and the port, this is standard 3306. Okay, again, for your own company, they will provide you with this information as well. So you just have to put them into the correct places. Okay? And then for the username, okay, the username is the one that you created when you set up MySQL server. So for those of you who joined a bit late, I'll share the two links again. You can simply search it on Google for the MySQL server download and the SQL Workbench. Now, again, this username and the password is the one that you will be creating when you set up your MySQL server. Okay, so make sure you keep it to something simple because no one else should be able to access it. It's only local, right? You don't have to make it complicated that you will forget later on. Okay? So once you put in your own username and your password, you just click on OK, and the new setup will be available for you. Right. So again, today we're just going to go over some simple queries for those of you who joined last time. I think we went through some series. Okay. So the first queries that you would need to know when working with a SQL database is to select the default database. Okay. So as you can see here on my left-hand side, okay, each of these two drop-down lists, okay, there are two different databases that are available on MySQL server. Now, most of your query will be working with only one database. Okay? Each database will contain multiple tables and multiple views, but you're working within one database only. So your first job is to tell your workbench which database you want to use. How can I get to the current screen? Okay, so on this screen, once you set up your connection, just click on the connection itself, and you will open a editor page for that connection. Okay, so once you set up your connection, just click on the name. Just once, you don't have to double click, and you will open the editor page. All right, so as a step, I'm going to kind of skip over the database setup for now. Again, if you don't know how to set up database, we do have videos on our course that will teach you how to set them up step by step. Okay. So today I'm just going to run queries on top of the already set up database. Okay. So first thing I want to do, select the default database. The keyword here is the use keyword. Okay. And then I will just type in the name of the database itself. So for today's demo, we're using the Superstore database. So I'm going to use Superstore. Okay. Now, for the query, make sure you do end off with a semicolon. Okay. Because without a semicolon, your SQL doesn't know when one query ends and the other query starts. Right? So think of the semicolon like a period. And to answer the question in the chat, most of your SQL queries are not case sensitive. Yes. So for the SQL Open, it's just the name I give to my own connection. Right? So once you set up your own MySQL server, right, you would just give it a name here. So for the query, you would have your keyword and then what database you want to select and end it off with a semicolon. Okay. And you just run this by either clicking on the execute, okay, or you would just use Control Enter. After you execute a query, you should see something down below where it said action output. Okay. So if you see this green check mark, that means the query has run correctly. Okay. If you see anything else, look into the messages. because that will tell you what is wrong with the query itself. Okay, so sorry, I'm going to change it up a bit for today because most of you do not have the database ready. So we're just going to start with the setup of the database. Okay, so give me one moment. I'm going to share the Google folder again for our database. Okay. Make sure you download the folder onto your own computer and make sure you know the path to that to those files. So we're going to do database setup. Okay. All right, so to set up a database, once you have your own connection, okay, you have to make sure that you choose a name for the database that is unique for the server. Okay, so for example, if I were to create another database, I cannot call it Superstore because one already exists on the server. Okay, so for the demo purposes, I'm going to create a database called Superstore 2. Okay. So to create the database, we will just use create database as our two keywords, okay, and then give the name of the database you wish to create. So I'm going to say Superstore 2. Okay. And again, always end off your query with a semicolon. Okay. When this is done, you can just use Control Enter, where I think for Mac users, it might be Command Enter. Okay. And again, check the output. You should see there's a green check mark that repeats the query that you type. On your left-hand side, if you click on the refresh key, you should see the new database that was created. So creating a database is very, very simple. Okay. The only thing you need to make sure is that the name of the database is unique. Okay. If the database you try to create is not unique, so I'm going to run the same query again to mimic, creating a database with the same name. Right. In your output, you see that it is an X, right? It's a red button. And again, once you see this, look into the messages column. Okay, and the message is said, cannot create database. Database exists. Okay. So if you ever see something like this, it means that there's already a database on the server with this name. Does it have something to Yeah, so to answer one of the questions in the chat, this has here, yeah, will change this line into a comment. So it's not a code, it's basically your own notes for yourself. Okay. And to answer the other question, to refresh, you just click on this refresh button here. Okay. And it refreshes the site. Right. So now that we have created our database, we're going to select it for the table creations. Okay. So again, to select the database, we would just write the keyword use and then Superstore 2. Okay. So now our default database is Superstore 2. Now, at any time when you're working in the server, you're not sure what the default database is. Okay. You can simply run the command select database with the parenthesis. Okay. And the output here tells you which database is your default. You're not sure which database you selected, but you can just run select database. Make sure you have the brackets or the parentheses. Okay, this will tell you which database is the default database. Now that we have a new database, the next thing we need to do is to create some tables in the database itself. Okay. So once again, make sure you get the data from the Google Drive link in the chat. Okay, and save it somewhere on your computer, but make sure you know the path to these files. So in this folder, it's going to show it to you in the Google Drive itself. Okay, you will have 4 CSVs. So we're going to create 4 different tables. And you also have the entity relationship diagram. Okay, so just briefly to talk about the entity relationship diagram, this tells you how the different tables in the database are connected. Okay. And also from here, you can get the column name and the data type of each table. Okay. And this is important when you're setting up your table. So let's first set up our customers table. Okay. So on our SQL Workbench, we're just going to do create table. Okay. And we're going to give the table its name, so customers. Okay. But unlike a database, for a table, you need to define the schema. So by schema, it means you need to define the column or field names and also the data type of each field. Okay. So to do that, after you type out the name of the table, you would open your bracket. Okay. And usually here, we would go to the next line so that it's cleaner to see. Okay. Do a little indent. And using our entity relationship diagram, okay, we're just going to write these into the following lines. So the first column is our customer ID. Okay. And to define the data type, we just put a space, okay, and type in the type itself. So int here means integer or int. Okay. To go to the second column, right, to define the second column, we add a comma first. And again, normally we go to the next line for the second column. So when we read back our code, it's easier for us to see what the columns are. So continuing, the second column is customer name. And the data type here is called varchar. Okay, and it has 100. Okay. So varchar here means varying characters, meaning it is a string, okay, but the length of the string might be different going from row to row. Okay, and 100 is the maximum amount of characters we allow in that field. And again, to answer the question in the chat, yes, there is a space between the table name and the open bracket. Okay. Now for the rest, again, just showing you the entity relationship diagram. For the rest, we're just going to copy the next 3 lines, right? Making sure we add a comma before we go to the next line. So we have province, okay, and this is varchar of 50. Okay, we have region. This is also varchar of 30. And we have customer segment. This is varchar of 20. Okay. And as you can see here, right, for the varchar, I kind of intentionally did capitalize and no capitalize. For most SQL queries, it's not case sensitive, right? So these two basically mean the same. Okay. Same thing with int, right? If it's all lowercase, SQL will still understand what it is. So for each column, right, you type in the column name and then the data type, right? To move on, you would add a comma. For the last column, you're just going to close the bracket, right? So when you open up here, and end off your query with a semicolon. So this is to create a table called customers. Setting up your query with comment. You can do that if you want to. Yeah. So if you have basically a pre-existing query, you can also copy and paste it in. Yeah, that should be fine. Okay. So for this table, okay, again, we need to run this. Okay. Again, make sure you check the output down here, right? If you see the green check mark, it means the table has created properly. If you don't see the green check mark, right, look in the messages to see what happened. Now, once you created the table, right now it's an empty table. So the structure of the table exists, but the information does not. Okay. So what we need to do now is to load data into our table itself. Okay. Now, there's actually something else in your connection that you need to change before you can upload data from your local computer. And this is because SQL Server want to protect the integrity of your data, right? So it's not allowing people to freely upload information into the database because there might be wrong information or they might be corrupting information. Okay? So first thing we're going to do is we're going to edit our connection by adding a setting. Okay? So in our here, there we go. Yeah, so in our database, we're going to click on Manage Connection. Okay. So we have this dialog box that pops up, right? The one we used when we created the connection. Then we're going to go to advanced. Here. We're going to go to advanced, and we need to put in either of these two links. Okay, so you just copy and paste them into the others. Okay, so I'll go through the steps again. Okay, so on your SQL Workbench, go to Database, click on Manage Connections. Okay, once you have your pop-up dialog box, select the connection you want to modify, go to Advanced, and add these two in to the others. So what this is doing is on the server side, it's allowed to receive data from your local computer. However, for SQL, not only does this server side need to have the correct permission to receive data, okay, your client side or your SQL Workbench need to give permission to send data as well. Okay. So you often see this line for any table creation is set global local in file equal to true. So once you run this line, okay, now your client side is communicating to your server side, and your server side is communicating to your client side. And so now when you are loading data into your table, right, both the server and the client are communicating to each other by sending the data around. Now, this line of code, you only need it once per script. Okay, so even if I'm creating, let's say, 10 tables, I don't need to run this line every time I create a table. Okay, as long as I run this at the beginning or somewhere in my script, right, when I load in data, my client side will send the data into the server side. So any questions on this step? All right, in that case, the next step we're going to do now is actually load in the data from our own computer, right, into your database. Okay. So the command to load data into a table would use load data. Now we need to add the keyword local, if this is from our local computer, right? So local, and then in file, meaning our data is inside this file. And then we need to give the path to our file itself. Okay. So for me, my path would be C, WCD, SQL Open, Superstore, and then customers.csv. Okay. And again, this path would depend on where on your own computer you save the data file. Okay, so don't just copy this from the screen, right? Make sure you find the file and actually use the path to that file. For Mac users, you would not need to begin in C. You just start with the slash. Yeah, so that's very important. So it has to be a forward slash. Not a backward slash. Okay. So in this line, load data, local info, so from your local computer, right, in this file, and then give the path to where your data is. Okay. The next thing you need to do is to tell your SQL workbench, right, where to put this data. So you will say into table, right, customers. So into table are the keywords. Customer is the name of the table you want to put into. Okay. Now, the next thing you need to tell your SQL workbench is how does it know when it's reading the data, okay, to go from one column to the next. Okay. And in SQL, we actually call columns fields, right? So how does SQL know, right, when it's reading the file to go from one field to the next? Okay. So in this case, you would need to open up the file itself, okay, and then see how the data is separated. Let me just show this to you, right? So this is opening the customers file, right? So we need to see how does it go from one column to the next. Okay. So what do we call this space? Does anyone want to jump in? Okay. From one column to the next. Yeah, so the tab delimiter. Yes, exactly, right? Yeah, so basically now for our query, we need to tell our SQL, right, what delimiter is used between each column. So we'll say fields terminated by, right? So each field ends with, right, the tab delimiter. And the tab delimiter inside the quote is a backward slash T. Sorry. So whenever you see this backward slash T, right, this means tab. Now, after you tell SQL how to go from one field to the next, you also have to tell SQL how to go from one line to the next, right? One row to the next row. Okay. And most of the case, it will be lines terminated by /n. Okay. And the /n is the new line character. So this is one of the white space characters that you don't really see directly when you open the file. So just once again, right, you have your load data local info, how you're loading the data, right? So the path to your data, where is the data? Okay, then into table, where is the data going to? And then you have to tell SQL how is each field terminated, whether it is a tab or a comma or any other delimiters. Okay, and how is the lines terminated? Right? How does it know to go from one row to the next? And most of the time, it is the /n character. It's a new line character. So now that we have a query, right, we ended off with semicolon, and we run this query. Give me 1 second. I think I made the pass wrong. Oh, I forgot the user. That's users. Okay. And after you load the data, it's always a good idea to just preview your table. Okay? Which means you just want to see the first few lines to make sure that the data is loading in as you expected. Okay? So to do that, so to preview the table. Oh, so yeah, so for this line, because I had X, I made a mistake in my pass, right? So here it said file, this pass not found, right? So if you see this, just double check your pass here. Okay, make sure the pass is correct. So my mistake before was I forgot the users folder before the WCD folder. Okay. Yeah. So if you see the red X, it's nothing to be too concerned about, right? Always read the message because the message tells you what went wrong. Okay. So just say something went wrong, read the message, what went wrong. Okay. So to preview the table, it's just a simple query that we're going to do. Okay. Is the select query. So select is basically choosing which columns. Usually just do select star. Okay. Star here is the wildcard. Okay. By saying select star, it means we're selecting each column in the table. Okay, so select star, and then from the table name, so customers. Okay. And usually when you're working with different databases, you don't know how big the tables are, right? So by just running select star from the table, it might not be a good idea just because the table might be very, very big. Okay, so you always want to add like a limit and just give it a number. So limit 10, which means we're only looking at the first 10 lines in the table itself. All right, so one of the comment in the chat, right? If you have the error 3948 loading local data is disabled, it means that either you forgot to run this line or in your connection. Okay, so in my connection, in the advanced tab, you forgot to put these two in. Now, sometimes, and this does happen from time to time, because it's a new configuration, because it's a new setting to your server itself, okay, you may need to reopen the connection again. Okay, so if running the code and also adding the setting doesn't work, okay, simply close the tab, close the connection, and reopen it. That usually fixes it. Okay, so double check that those two are done properly, right? And then if it still doesn't work, close it, reopen it, run. You had to run this line again, right? But it should be working after that. Okay. And again, with preview table, you usually want to add a limit. Okay, the number behind is something of your own choice. Okay, but usually we keep to 5 or 10, something small enough, just so we make sure that the data is in there as we expect. Okay. So let's run this line. And you should see the first 10 rows and make this a bit bigger. Okay, the first 10 rows in our customers table. So as a practice for everyone, there are 3 other tables in our folder, right? I'll leave those 3 setups to you. Okay. The only one I'm going to mention here is the products table. So we're going to do the products table together. Okay. Only because there is one little difference between them. Okay. Okay, so the first question I see, varchar 30 put spaces in between the field. No, I think the space is because of how long, maybe the longest one is. Okay, varchar is a varying character. So the 30 just means that the longest you can expect is 30 characters for that string. But if it's shorter, it's not going to put empty spaces to fill in the gap. Okay, so varchar is different than char. Char is a set amount of characters. So every line in that field has to be exactly that number of characters. Load data. So for the load data local info request rejected due to restriction on access, I haven't seen that before. It could be because your file might be in a zip folder. That's what I'm guessing, right? So make sure it's not in a zip folder. Yeah, because I haven't seen that before, unfortunately. Okay, yeah. So I think what you might need to do is just to close this tab and reopen it again. So because we added the advanced settings, and so because we added the advanced settings, it may not have registered since we still have the connection open. Okay. So click on test connection. If that still doesn't work, just close the tab. Oops, sorry. Okay. Just close this tab and then click on the connection again to reopen it. Okay. And you would just need to run the line use database and set global in file. Okay. And it should allow you to run the load data now. So like I said, I'm going to walk through the creation of the products table together with you. The only reason is that's the only table that has one extra line of code that might take a while for you to figure out. Okay, so I'm just going to give you the schema of the products table. I'll just click on the name of the connection. Right, so just click on the name of the connection just once, no need to double click, and the tab will open back up again. Okay. So I'm going to send you the products table schema just so we can save some time here. So let's create this products table. And we're going to load the data the same way. So load data, local in file, and again, the path to your file. So C users, and then the file name. Okay. Then into table products. Okay. Now here is the extra line. For some of your data, they may need different encoding. So you may have some special characters. For example, you might be reading in, let's say, a Mandarin data set, right? So you would have to find out what the character set is. I think it's UTF-8. Okay? For some data set, you might be reading in, let's say, French, right? French inside the data. So there's special characters. So you need to kind of use the correct encoding. In products, that case comes up, okay? And the encoding here is Latin 1. So to set the correct encoding to the file itself, you just put in character set, okay, and then as a string, whatever encoding it needs to be. So Latin 1. Okay. Now, in most of the files, you don't need this line, okay, but in some files that have special characters, you will need to look for the encoding and put this line in there. Okay. And then the rest will be the same. So fields terminated by, right, our tab, and lines terminated by the new line character. Now, one other thing I want to mention here, with this code, load data, what SQL is actually doing is just appending the data into your table. Okay? So what I mean by this, right, is that if I were to run this code multiple times, right, my table will just get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So more rows will be added, but they will just be duplicate rows. Okay? So to check how many rows you have in your table, okay, so check how many rows there are. You would do count, okay, select, count star, okay, and then from your table. So in this case, I'm going to use the products table here. Okay, the output is just a number, and this number is how many rows you have in the table itself. Now, if I were to run the same line of code more than once, so let's say if I run it again, and again, and again, right? SQL is not overwriting the data. It's just appending more rows. And this could happen, right? Sometimes you run your script, you may run the same line of code more than once by accident. Okay? So to save this, right, what we want to do is kind of erase the data that's in the table and reload in the data itself. Okay? So we want to keep the structure of the table, but we want to clean out the data. Right? So to do that, so to clean out the data, we use the keyword truncate, okay, and the table name, so truncate products. Okay, so when we do this, our table now has no data inside, okay? But the structure of the table still exists. So if you accidentally run the load command more than once, instead of starting from scratch, right, getting rid of the table and starting anew, you just do truncate and then reload the data again. Now, if you accidentally created the wrong schema, right, unfortunately, you would have to delete the table. Okay, so I'm just going to show you that scenario. So let's say wrong table schema. Okay, so here, let's say I'm going to create products 2, and I want to call this int. Okay. So now I have a table that has a wrong schema. Okay. To fix this, unfortunately, I had to delete the table, fix the schema, and recreate the table. Okay. So when the schema is wrong, you cannot just truncate, right? So you would just have to delete the table. Okay. So to delete the table, you do drop table, okay, and products 2. So once again, if you're loading in wrong data, you can truncate to clear out the data, but keep the structure. Okay. But if your schema or your structure of the table is wrong, you would need to drop the table. Now, one other thing I forgot to mention at the beginning, right? Just like how the database names are unique per server, right? Your table names should be unique per database. Okay, so inside Superstore 2, I cannot have 2 tables with the same name, right? Otherwise, when I run these kind of select statements, you wouldn't know which table I'm referring to. And again, I'm going to leave the returns table and the orders table creation for you. Okay. And then for our next session, which is next week, we will be running through some queries, starting with some basic ones, and we'll go to more advanced ones near the end of the session. But before I let everyone go, are there any final questions for today? Okay. Well, in that case, thank you everyone for taking your time out to joining us in the SQL Open course. Okay. Our links are provided in the Zoom chat. We will be posting the recording of this session on our YouTube channel as well. Okay. If you have any questions in the meantime, please join our Discord channel so we can answer your question through Discord. Okay. Otherwise, I hope to see everyone in our next session as well. Okay. Oh, so one of the questions in the chat, if our data, the CSV, is updated in daily basis and the rows is getting bigger and bigger, how do we append the new data without duplicating the existing one? So in that case, since your CSV, the same CSV that you're using, is getting bigger, the best case would just be truncate, okay, and reload the data. Okay. Next time, we'll talk about insert statement. So instead of adding the rows to each CSV, you can just add it directly to the table itself.